what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've done a computer video, and as you guys can see, I've got the good old H81 from BioStar hooked up. So basically what we're going to be doing is I got a couple graphics cards to test. I've got two HD 7870s. I found them at Goodwill of all places for about $15.99 a pop, and so I said, might as well take a crack at it, see what happens, and we're going to see how well they do or they don't do. Alright, so first off, I just wanted to kind of show these cards off a little bit. So you can see it's the Diamond Multimedia, which I don't believe they're even around anymore. And these are the Gigahertz edition. There's nothing real special about these cards that I can tell. They both use 6-pin power connectors right there. As for I/O, we have two mini display ports, an HDMI, and an old-fashioned DVI. This is a blower-style card, so it's got the single fan right there. All the exhaust comes out the back, just like basically all blower-style cards. Other than that, specs-wise, I'll have the specs listed up above, or up in the video for you guys. The only thing that I do know off the top of my head is that these are both 2 GB cards. So, they will be good for very basic gaming. I doubt that they'll be able to play anything too major. As for the suite of benchmark tests I'm going to be running, I've got Heaven's Benchmark, Superposition, as well as Valley. Valley and Heavens came out around the same time as these cards. I believe these cards came out in, I want to say, 2012. Alright, so these cards both came out in March of 2012, so I was correct. I haven't done any sort of thermal paste changes on these yet, and I haven't done any kind of cleaning. I plan on doing that after we do the first set of benchmarks, and then we'll do a retest to see how much performance has improved because of the cleaning. So, first off, as you guys can see, I'm using just the motherboard box to kind of hold it up. I got the little bracket poked down to kind of give it, to make it sit flush, so it's not like wobbling all over the place. What is cool is that these actually have Crossfire support, and it's funny because I actually was at Goodwill the other day and I saw a Crossfire bridge, and I didn't think to pick it up. So I guess it could have been that those bridges were actually for these cards. It was weird that they have the exact same cards and a Crossfire bridge at the same time. Alright, so we had some interesting results actually. GPU 1 and 2, despite being the exact same, showed a few variations, which I guess isn't surprising. GPU 1 was a little bit cooler, but also performed a little bit worse. GPU 2, however, performed a little bit hotter, but performed better as well. So first up, we have Heaven's Benchmark. We had an average of 50.3, a total score of 1268, a minimum FPS of 8.1, and a maximum FPS of 106.2. Temperature-wise, we had 65 degrees Celsius. As for GPU 2, we had 50.7 as an average FPS, a score of 1277, a minimum of 23.9, and a maximum of 106.3, and a temperature of 64 degrees Celsius. Moving on to Valley, we had 58.1 degrees, I apologize, FPS, a score of 2432, a minimum FPS of 13.6, and a maximum of 105.9, with a temperature of 67 degrees Celsius. GPU 2 performed well as well, 57.3 average, a score of 2397, a minimum FPS of 10.4, and a maximum FPS of 106.6, and it had an average temperature of 65 degrees Celsius. GPU 1 in Superposition, I actually ran this test twice. I wanted to do it at the high settings and the medium. The score for GPU 1 was 2763. We had an average of 20.6, a minimum of 16.5, and a maximum of 25.4. We had a maximum temperature of 66 degrees. With the medium preset, we had a score of 4095 with an average of 30.6, a minimum of 2505, and a maximum of 38.229. We had a maximum temperature of 65 degrees. moving on to GPU 2, for the higher preset, we had a 2767 score, an average of 20.7, a minimum of 15.15, and a max of 25.28, with a maximum temperature of 63. For the medium settings, we had a score of 4101, with a minimum FPS of 24.97, an average of 30.68, and a maximum of 38.2. We also had a maximum temperature of 64 degrees Celsius. Moving on to Time Spy, GPU 1 came in swinging at a 1791 score. We had a graphics score of 1634 and a CPU score of 3956. GPU 2 had an almost identical score of 1791. The graphics score was actually the only difference, I believe. It was 1633 versus the 1634 of the GPU 1, and the CPU score was 3981. Again, we really don't care about the CPU score. We're really just focusing on the differences between these two graphics cards. So after I did Time Spy, I ended up changing out the thermal compound on both GPUs. The graphics cards were both just absolutely filthy. There was dust everywhere. There was, actual hair inside one of the graphics cards. Thermal compound was completely dried up, and the thermal pads on the VRAM, or not the VRAM, the actual, I guess it would be VRAM, was starting to soak up some of that dust, and it was all getting stuck to the thermal pads. So I had to carefully clean the thermal pads off, as I do not have any sort of replacements for them. So hopefully I did a good enough job. I want to say we did, because the temperatures definitely decreased quite a bit for both graphics cards. Starting with Heaven benchmark, we had 50.7 as our average, a score of 1276, a minimum FPS of 22.1, and a maximum FPS of 105.3. For GPU 2, we had an average of 50.6 with a score of 1273, a minimum FPS of 23.7, and a maximum FPS of 105.1. And as for the temperatures for both graphics cards in Heaven, GPU 1 was 60 degrees Celsius and GPU 2 was 61 degrees Celsius. So for GPU 1, that's a 5 degree drop, and for GPU 2, that's a 3 degree drop. Valley on GPU 1 was an average FPS of 58.2. We had a score of 2434, a minimum FPS of 28.7, and a maximum of 106.6. Valley had a 5 degree drop of 62 degrees Celsius versus the original 67 degrees. GPU 2 had an average FPS of 58.3, a score of 2440, a minimum FPS of 29, and a maximum FPS of 106.2. The max temp on the GPU 2 is 63 degrees Celsius. For superposition, we had a score of 2793, an average of 20.89, a minimum of 17.06, and a maximum of 25.44. The average temperature actually dropped from 66 to 61 degrees, which was a great drop. I'm really happy about that. When I changed the thermal paste, I was just hoping if we could just bring those temperatures down just a tad. By doing so, it helps extend the life of the cards. For the medium settings, we had 4101 with an average of 30.68, a minimum of 25, and a maximum of 38.23. We had a maximum of 63 degrees Celsius, so not as big of a drop. It was only a 2 degree drop for the medium preset. As for GPU 2, on the high settings, we had a score of 2737, an average of 28.48, a minimum of 15.55, and a max of 2507. We had a max temperature of 63 degrees Celsius, which was exactly the same as the first run, which kind of surprised me a little bit, but, you know, honestly, 63 is not a bad temperature to begin with, so it's not anything that I'm really worried about. As for the medium settings, we had a score of 4101, an average of 30.6, a minimum of 25.1, and a maximum of 38.2. The temperature, again, was 63 degrees Celsius, so it didn't change from that original run. For 3D Mark, for GPU 1, we had a graphics score of 1633 and a CPU score of 3958. As for this particular test, I actually screenshotted a different page than usual, and I was able to get the graphics test score. So we had a graphics test 1 had 11.22 FPS average, and a graphics test 2 had a 8.96 average. Next we have GPU 2. We actually didn't get that same picture this time around, but so we just got the standard picture. We had an actual score 1792, which actually beat the average score, which is 1791. Not much of a win, but hey, I'll take it. We had a graphics score of 1633 and a CPU score of 4009. So all in all, I think that we did a good job lowering those temps. We squeezed a couple more frames out of the GPUs as well, I would say, after the second round of testing. Overall, the changing of the thermal paste is really just to extend the life of the cards and really nothing else. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Be sure to check out my other videos on the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.